Imagine traversing a frozen forest while the cold pierces your clothing. The solitude is oppressive, but for the odd rustle of the wind, until you suddenly spot a huge grizzly bear that stops your heart in its tracks. This is a story of bravery, survival, and the unbreakable bond between a human and a wild animal. But what happened after she freed the bear will leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring and emotional story like this. Emily Carter, a woman who had spent years studying wildlife but had never witnessed such cruelty, is shown shivering, its powerful body tied tightly to a tree with thick chains, its fur is matted with frost, its breathing shallow, and it looks at you with fear and desperation rather than aggression. Emily Carter wasn't afraid of the cold. She had spent most of her life in the Alaskan wilderness tracking animals, documenting their behaviors, and fighting against illegal poaching, but that morning something felt different. Wrapped in her thick winter coat, she trudged through the heavy snow, her boots sinking. With every step, the world around her was eerily silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then she heard a low, almost inaudible whimper. She stopped, her heartbeat quickened. Scanning the area, she saw nothing but endless trees, their branches weighed down by snow. But the sound came again, a heartbreaking weak cry. She followed the noise, her breath visible in the freezing air, and then she saw it, a massive grizzly bear. But something was terribly wrong. The bear was chained to a tree, its body hunched, its fur coated in ice and snow, its powerful legs trembled, its breath slow and labored. It had been left to die. Emily felt a lump in her throat. She had seen many terrible things in the wild, but this was pure cruelty. She took a cautious step forward. The bear lifted its head weakly, its eyes meeting hers. There was no aggression, no warning growl, just pain and exhaustion. Emily's gut told her to help him, but the bear was still dangerous, and she could become its next victim if she did the wrong thing. Leaving it there would mean the animal would die. So Emily had to make a decision quickly. As Emily stepped cautiously forward, the bear's eyes followed her warily, but without the aggression she had anticipated. It was as if he knew she was his only hope. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the survival knife, strapped her belt. She had previously freed animals from traps, but never anything this massive, never a grizzly bear. Then Emily saw something that made her blood run cold. The chains around the bear's body was made up of thick metal chains that were purposefully wrapped around his torso and legs rather than old hunting snares or abandoned traps. Someone had done this on purpose, causing her stomach to twist in disgust. Why did she do this? And why did the bear whimper again, shifting slightly in the snow, his enormous body trembling from hunger and exhaustion? As she knelt beside the bear, Emily realized the chains were too thick, and the bolt cutter barely scratched the metal. Her frustration boiled inside her. She needed a stronger tool, and she needed it. The bear then let out a long, shuddering breath, his head drooping lower, and Emily panicked, wondering if he was going to die in front of her. Emily knew she had very little time before the cold completely overtook him. So she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small bolt cutter she always carried in case she came across illegal poacher traps. She removed her glove and put her palm lightly on his fur, sensing the freezing chill that held him in place. She could also feel his rapid breathing beneath her fingertips, the slow rise and fall of a body that had nearly let go of the big guy. She whispered, "I'll be right back," and ran toward her snowmobile, her boots slipping against the ice as she ran. As the minutes passed, Emily hurried back to the bear, who hadn't moved for a second, fearing she was too late. But then she noticed the slow movement of his chest and the slight flicker of his ear, confirming that he was still alive. She dropped to her knees in the snow and placed the heavy-duty bolt cutter against the first chain, her hands freezing, her arms burning from the effort. Snap, the first link gave way, and the bear flinched, letting out a deep but feeble growl. The bear did not attack Emily, but instead shifted his body, tensing as if expecting more pain. Emily swallowed hard and continued working as quickly as she could, severing each chain and freeing him piece by piece. Each broken link felt like a minor victory, but she wasn't finished yet. The last chain was wrapped around his front legs, cutting into the skin and creating a frozen crust against his fur. The bear gave a soft rumble that sounded almost like a sigh as Emily's hands shook as she held the saw and started to cut away the heavy metal. When the last piece of metal finally fell into the snow, he was set free. The bear moved and tensed his muscles as he attempted to move for the first time in a long time, and Emily staggered backward with her heart pounding. He could fight her for a long time or run. The grizzly raised his head and gazed at her before slowly and painfully trying to stand. His body wobbled and his legs shook, but he didn't fall. This was the moment of truth, and Emily held her breath. With one last glance, the bear turned away and started to limp toward the forest. Emily let out a sharp breath, her legs weak beneath her. She had done it. But one question lingered in her mind. Who had done this to him, and would they do it again? The bear turned his enormous head toward her, and their eyes met again. There was no anger, no attack, just a silent understanding. Emily's heart was still pounding in her chest as she stood in the snow, her breath coming in sharp, short gasps, and watched the grizzly limp away into the forest. She had done something extremely risky by releasing a distressed wild animal, but she knew deep down that she had made the right decision. However, something wasn't quite right. Who would chain a bear in the middle of nowhere? With her keen eyes scanning the unspoiled snow, Emily looked around. The woodland was strangely quiet, but for the rare frost was carrying a stream of tree branches when she noticed it. Emily fell to a crouch and studied the footsteps more carefully, realizing that they were human and not just barren traces. There were many hunters in these woods, but no actual poachers that she knew of. Chaining a bear like that wasn't just cruel, it was unnatural. They were fresh, leading away from the tree where the bear had been restrained. Whoever had done this had been here recently. She clenched her jaw and felt a surge of rage. She reached into her pocket and took out her phone. She would have to deal with this alone because there was no signal available due to the dense pines and the distant location. Taking a deep breath, she followed the footsteps into the forest, each step crunching softly in the snow. After over 15 minutes of following the path, Emily noticed something unexpected. The bear had been hauled, not accidentally chained there, as evidenced by the disturbed snow and deep grooves that showed signs of a struggle in her stomach. Emily's throat constricted as she moved closer through the churned snow and noticed something partially buried in the snow. She knelt and brushed the snow away until her fingers touched something metallic, a spent bullet casing her pulse. She swallowed hard, wondering if they had planned to kill the bear and failed, or if they had captured him for another reason. A sharp gust of wind howled through the trees, making Emily shiver, but she persisted in following the trail as the minutes went by, noticing that the footprints became more erratic, as if someone had been moving quickly, possibly running. Then, through the dense trees, she saw a small, isolated cabin that was barely visible beneath the thick layers of snow smoke curled from a rusty chimney, a clear indication that someone was inside, her hands curled into fists. Emily took a deep breath and moved closer, following the shadows of the trees. Her instincts told her to proceed cautiously, but as she approached the front of the cabin, she noticed something even more chilling hanging on the wooden porch: multiple animal pelts, wolves, foxes, and even a massive black bear skin. Emily's stomach dropped because she had just walked right into a poacher's territory, and just as she was about to back off, she heard a low, gruff voice talking. Her heart thumped as she crept around the cabin's side, pressing her back against the wooden wall. Now she could hear two deep, raspy voices, so she held her breath. "I told you," one voice growled. "The bear got loose, and we should have killed it while we had the chance." The second voice said, "Damn, the chain probably snapped and ran off by now. If we don't find it soon, it won't be worth a thing." Emily's blood felt cold. Emily bit her lip to prevent herself from gasping as they searched for the bear. She pressed herself against the cabin wall, her thoughts racing. If these men discovered what she had done, they wouldn't let her leave, and worse, they would try to find the bear again. Emily knew she had to decide whether to risk going inside and confronting the poachers or to try to escape and find the bear before they did. She had only a few seconds to make a decision, so she took a deep breath and clenched her fists. The weight of the situation weighed heavily on Emily, who was alone in the middle of nowhere outside the cabin of two dangerous men actively looking for the same grizzly bear she had just freed. Emily knew that if they found the bear first, it wouldn't survive, so she pressed herself closer to the cabin's wall, her breath misting in the freezing air. She couldn't stay here. She had to find the bear before they made a creaking floorboard inside. A heavy pair of boots thudded against the hardwood floor, and then she heard movement from inside. One of the men mumbled, "Let's head out now before the storm picks us up." Emily's stomach knotted. If she waited too long, they would be on the move, so she had to leave. She took a step back from the cabin, being careful not to make a sound, and fled into the tree line back into the wilderness. As she got farther into the woods, time was running out, so she tried to follow the bear's trail in search of any broken branches or tracks in snow. The forest was huge, and the bear had been weak and exhausted, so it couldn't have gone very far. When a set of paw prints appeared in the snow, her heart leaped, and she followed them cautiously and swiftly. The further she went, the more signs she saw: small patches of disturbed snow, claw marks against tree bark. The bear was slow and injured, but it was still moving. Emily tightened her fists because she had to get to him first. A wolf's long, eerie howl reverberated through the forest. Because wolves were predators and a weak, defenseless bear would be an easy target, Emily knew these forests well enough to detect a hunting call. Emily saw the grizzly bear collapsed in the snow at the top of a small ridge, barely moving. His enormous frame was hunched, his breath labored, his fur still damp from the snow, his eyes half open, clouded with exhaustion. Emily's feet pounded against the frozen ground as she picked up speed, ignoring the burning in her legs. The prince ahead was still fresh, leading up a narrow hill. Emily said, "Come on, big guy," as she stepped toward him. He was giving up, and the worst part is that the howls were getting closer. Emily felt a knot in her throat. As he attempted to stand, the bear's legs shook and his head raised feebly, exposing his ribs through his fur. Emily gently reached out, moving slowly and steadily. She knew she couldn't make a move, but she might still be of assistance. In a last-ditch effort to save him, she took off her bag, picked up a protein bar, and used her teeth to rip it apart before holding it out to the bear in the hopes that its aroma would awaken him. His nose twitched, and she hoped he was still strong enough to eat. The bear tentatively sniffed, and then, with shaky movements, he bit Emily. Emily didn't realize she was holding him, but he was still fighting, and the danger was closing in. She whirled around, eyes scanning the trees, thinking that something was approaching, possibly the poachers or the wolves. But she was running out of time, so she groaned and turned back to the bear. "Come on, buddy, you have to trust me." The bear pushed himself up, trembling. After hearing a gunshot, Emily's body froze. The poachers were closer than she had anticipated, so she grabbed a fallen tree branch and threw snow over it to hide their tracks. She knew she couldn't stop them entirely, but she could at least buy them some time. Emily turned back to the bear, whose legs wobbled, but he was still standing, and she wasn't going to let him face this alone, so she whispered, "I'm getting you out of here." With one last look behind her, she led him deeper into the forest, where the wind howled through the trees like a warning. Claire took a quick breath. The sight broke her heart. The grizzly bear was still bound to the tree, shivering violently, its massive frame unnaturally frail from exhaustion and exposure to the elements. The ropes had dug into its skin, leaving raw bloody marks around its thick fur, and its breaths were slow and ragged, each exhaling accompanied by a weak mist that vanished into the freezing air. The bear didn't even have the energy to struggle any further, so Claire dropped to her knees next to it, her hands shaking from the cold and the overwhelming her fingers fumbled as she took a knife from her jacket. The knots were tight and were intentionally cruel. Whoever had done this wanted to ensure that the bear wouldn't escape. The thought sent a surge of fury through her veins, but she pushed it aside because there was no time for anger, only action. She pressed the blade against the thick rope and started sawing furiously, her muscles burning from the effort. The bear flinched slightly at the sensation, but it lacked the strength to resist the thick, coarse strands, refusing to break at first. Claire's fingers were nearly numb, but she didn't stop after what felt like an eternity The rope snapped. The grizzly let out a deep, exhausted groan as its massive body slumped forward, freed, but unable to move. CLA quickly pulled her jacket off and draped it over the bear's shaking form, knowing it wasn't nearly enough to keep it warm, but hoping it would provide some comfort. She reached out slowly, placing her palm gently against the bear's head. Its deep brown eyes flickered open, filled with something she never expected: trust. It could have attacked her, it should have, by instinct alone, but instead it let out a low, weak huff, almost as if acknowledging her presence, accepting her help. Claire swallowed hard. She knew this wasn't over. The bear was free, but it was still dying. Its body was far too weak from dehydration and starvation. It wouldn't last much longer in this state. She had no idea how much time she had before it was too late. Her mind raced. There was no way she could carry the bear, not even with every ounce of strength in her body. It was too massive, too heavy, too weak to even stand. She needed help. Claire took out her phone with ice-cold fingers and dialed frantically, but there was no signal. She thought she had to get back to the main road and find help, but she couldn't just leave the bear here alone. So she knelt beside again and said, "I'll be back, I promise." Her chest tightened, and she had only a few minutes left to run. Her legs felt like they were moving on pure adrenaline as she ran back through the snow-covered forest, slipping, falling, and pushing herself back up every second, feeling like a lifetime. She didn't know if she would make it back in time, or if the bear would still be alive when she did, and her lungs burned as she ran. Every step seemed like a fight against tiredness, a frantic gasp. The bear needed assistance against time, and she was the only one who could provide it. Her legs ached and her muscles cried out for rest, but she refused to stop when her boots sank into the frigid ground, and the thought of the freezing, defenseless grizzly strapped to that tree just made her more desperate. Although it wasn't long to the main road, was she too late to break through the tree line? Claire spotted her truck parked haphazard on the side of the road. She fumbled for the keys in her jacket, her hands shaking violently from the cold and adrenaline. Her fingers barely worked, stiff and numb, but she forced them to obey. She jumped into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life. Wasting no time, she grabbed her phone and tried again. No service. Come on, she growled, slamming her fist against the dashboard. There was only one option left. She threw the truck into drive and floored the gas pedal, speeding toward the nearest ranger station. The tires skid slightly on the icy road, but she kept control. Her knuckles white as she gripped the wheel. The ranger station was nearly 6 m away, and every second counted. The image of the bear, its sunken eyes, its trembling frame, the scars that marred its once powerful body, haunted her. She couldn't let it die. As soon as she reached the ranger station, she practically jumped out of the truck before it had fully stopped. Rushing inside, she saw Mike Carter, the senior ranger, sitting behind a desk flipping through some paperwork. He barely had time to look up before Claire slammed her hands down in front of him. "I need help now." Mike scowled at Claire. "What's going on?" she asked, taking a deep breath to try to calm herself enough to explain. "There's a grizzly tied to a tree, freezing to death. Someone did this on purpose. It's barely alive. I need a rescue team." Mike's face darkened as she gave him the location, and he didn't hesitate. Within minutes, the entire station was mobilized. "Take the truck." Mike gave the order to grab a radio and bring supplies. Relief flooded through her, but the fear persisted because it was already too late. The convoy of cars raced through the forest, headlights cutting through the darkening evening sky. The snowfall had increased, making visibility difficult, but Claire's focus remained unwavering. She led the group back to the clearing, her heart pounding in time with the tires hitting every bump on the frozen ground. As soon as she arrived at the location, she jumped out of the truck and ran toward the tree, where she caught her breath. The bear was still there, but it wasn't moving, so CLA whispered as she ran toward it. The rescue team followed closely behind, flashlights, with the grizzly still glowing. CLA fell on her knees and put her hands on the bear's head. "Please, it's cold," she said, and suddenly he took a small breath, indicating that he was still alive. "Prepare the sedative." One of the rangers yelled that they had to move the bear securely because they couldn't take the chance of getting hurt anymore. CLA backed off as the team worked swiftly and expertly. They wrapped the grizzly in insulated blankets to retain its body heat, and carefully injected a mild sedative, just enough to keep it calm, but not too much to hurt it further. A makeshift stretcher was made that was sturdy enough to support the bear's weight, and it took 6 people to carefully lift the bear and maneuver it onto the transport sled. The following hour seemed to drag on forever as the rescue crew carefully moved the bear while monitoring its breathing, and Claire felt tears well up in her eyes. At the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the veterinarian was already on standby, providing fluids, medication, and the highest quality of treatment. Even though the bear was in a vulnerable state, he was still fighting after all the pain, so CLA sat in the back of the lead truck and watched him through the rear window. "Hang in there, big fellow." The bear's fate now rested in their hands as the trucks arrived at the rehabilitation facility, she whispered. The team sprang into action as soon as the truck stopped in front of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The bear, still wrapped in thermal blankets, lay motionless but breathing, and Claire leaped out of the car, her heart hammering against her chest. This was the last battle, and 2 veterinarians, Doctors James Carter and Olivia Hart, were already waiting at the entrance. Their faces were solemn, but their hands were steady. "So, let's move." As directed by Dr. Carter, the group cautiously raised the bear onto a mobile gurney, making sure Dr. Hart added, "We've given him fluids, treated his wounds, and started a refeeding plan. He had acute starvation, dehydration, hypothermia, and several old wounds, most likely from previous abuse, but he was a fighter. Can I see him?" Claire nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. After a brief pause, Dr. Hart nodded for a few minutes. "Since he is still medicated, don't expect to see much movement." The bear, whose once matted frozen fur had been cleansed to reveal extensive scars down his back and legs, was lying on a thick padded mat with tubes extending from his body to monitors that beeped softly in the background. CLA followed her into the dimly lighted treatment room. Claire was kneeling next to him. Her words was hardly audible above the bear's chest as her fingers touched the velvety fur close to his enormous paw. He had struggled so hard that he rose and sank in calm, steady breaths. Claire clenched her hands, saying, "We'll find them, and we'll make sure this never happens again." The scars, the collar, and the dread in his eyes all pointed to something evil. Dr. Hart touched her shoulder. "We've informed the local authorities about the situation, and if there is a history of abuse, we'll take all necessary steps to find the perpetrator." Claire nodded, saying that saving this bear alone wasn't enough. Days of justice went into weeks as the bear, who the clinic staff lovingly called Kodiak, gradually recovered his health. At first, he could hardly raise his head, but soon after he was able to stand and move, and his once drab, dead eyes started to glow with fresh vitality. It seemed as though Kodiak was recalling what freedom felt like for the first time, not running, not hiding, not healing, when Claire visited him every day. She watched as he cautiously took his first steps outside the enclosure, sniffing the air and twitching his ears at the sounds of the wind rustling the trees. The day of his release arrived sooner than Claire had anticipated. At the release site, a protected wildlife reserve where Kodiak would have a second chance at life away from harm, Dr. Carter called her early one morning. Claire's heart clenched, but she knew this moment would arrive. The large transport crate was open, and for a moment, Kodiak hesitated. He turned to face Claire one last time, holding her breath, and then he stepped out cautiously at first, then more confidently, and finally he was gone, disappearing into the trees as home. Claire smiled through her tears. "Big dude, you deserve to be free." The inquiry into Kodiak's abuse led authorities to an illicit wildlife trafficking organization, where multiple arrests were made and further animals were freed from captivity. As Claire stood at the edge of the forest, listening to the distant rustling of leaves, she realized that Kodiak was out there thriving, and that was all she needed to know. If this story inspired you, remember that kindness and courage can change lives. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share the story to help spread awareness about protecting wildlife. Together, we can make a difference. Claire had begun this journey to save one bear, but in the end, she helped save many more.